thank all of you for coming, taking your time off the floor rather. Uh, a couple of things. I'm going to do a little bit of a orientation and context, but before I do that, I want to emphasize a couple of things. A, there's no need to take notes. If you send me a request, email, I'll be happy to send you the complete PowerPoint presentation. That's particularly important because even though my co-presenter Chris and I have never done this together, I'm not sure about time frame. And so what I did, in the event we can't get into the last few slides, I have a handout that can be downloaded from a QR code. And so in the presentation that you requested, the PowerPoint, that QR code will exist. And if we cannot get to the very end, I'll explain a bit more as to what will be included. So let me, first of all, talk about this topic exactly. This is not a common discussion because we're going to be talking about what I call the psychological, emotional aspects of diver training. And I never thought about this kind of stuff until the early 90s. At that time, my major gig was teaching instructors, and I had a psychotherapist enroll in my course because he thought that there would be benefit to his patients. And he went on actually to create a course called spirit diving. It was kind of neat. But a few years later, some of you may remember my role with Dive Training Magazine. They dispatched me to Cayman because this freediving course had just been introduced by INTD, and they wanted me to do a feature article. So they, as I said, dispatched me to Cayman. I was fortunate enough to learn from a Canadian freedive expert, Calissa Johnston. I thought I was going down and just teach some, or learn about some, mamby-pamby advanced snorkeling class. Boy, was I wrong. That was a profound experience because what she taught me was the relationship of breathing beyond its function for me to continue to live as a human being. She actually got into what we now term semantic breathing, which Chris is going to be demonstrating for us. But what really opened the floodgates to this whole issue of the inner experience, more or less, was this book, Wallace Nichols' Blue Mind. And if you haven't read it, I strongly, strongly encourage you. That young lady right there referred me to it years ago. Because he gets into all aspects. He's a marine biologist, but he talks about the physiology, the psychology, the emotion that being near water brings to us. If you're familiar with the late E.O. Wilson and his idea of what was his term? Anyway, but biophilia. His idea was that we have an innate desire to be with nature. And I'm going to make a case that that's especially true when we're in the ocean. And this, of course, is inspired, peer-reviewed research. But what we're going to be talking about is mindfulness. So what in the heck is that? One definition right here: acceptance of an intimate experience of being present and fully engaged in the current moment without judgment or distraction. Now, we're here at DEMA to make a better living. And before you run out of the room thinking this is just a bunch of new age nonsense, I want to put this in context. But before we do that, as I implied, this whole concept has been subsumed into the freediving community. And it makes no sense for me to pontificate in a realm that I have very, very little insight into. Hence, the gentleman right here. What I want Chris to do with us is to provide a brief exercise and to start to connect your breathing with more than just your need to survive. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to him.
So all we're going to do today is we're going to do some what we call diaphragmatic breathing, right? So through growing up, if you took a baby, you laid them on their back, they're going to be breathing. You're going to see their belly rise and fall. The chest barely moves at all. But what ends up happening, we grow up, we got to be attractive to those that we're trying to attract. So it's chest out, stomach in. We start breathing through our chest. We quit using our diaphragm. And with practice, we forget how to breathe through our diaphragm. 2/3 of the blood in your lungs are located in the lower 1/3 of your lungs. But if we're breathing off the top of our lungs, how much oxygen exchange are we actually getting, right? So the further into our bellies we breathe, the further you pull that oxygenated air, the more CO2 you get rid of, the better you oxygenate, the more relaxed you become. Another thing that happens physiologically, as you inhale, your lungs take up the space in your body cavity. In order to maintain blood pressure, your heart rate increases. Can't pump as much volume, so it has to pump more rapidly. But as you exhale, the heart has more room to pump, so it decreases. So if you're exhaling more than you're inhaling over time, your average heart rate drops. When you have a lower heart rate, you feel less stress, you actually become more relaxed, you use less oxygen, so you become more efficient. And so we're going to use these exercises. We're just going to do some diaphragmatic breathing, and I'm going to have you close your eyes, and you're going to go through, and I'm going to walk you through relaxing every part of your body, just to kind of get you to get in touch with your body. And this is something that we do in every one of our freediving classes, from basic freediver all the way to advanced. This is how we're able to go and do 5+ minute breath holds. All right? So to do a diaphragmatic breath, you're going to go ahead and put one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly, and you're going to, through pursed lips, so you're going to offer a little bit of resistance with your lips. You're going to breathe in through your belly without moving your chest, and it looks like this. And you're going to pause for 2 seconds, and then you're going to put your tongue against the roof of your lip or roof of your mouth, so that the only muscle that you're actually engaging is your tongue. And then you're going to relax. You're going to let that air slowly escape out over the course of 10 seconds. So it's inhale, pause, pause, and exhale. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000, 8, 1,000, 9, 1,000, 10. Pause, pause, inhale, pause, pause, exhale. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000, 8, 1,000, 9, 1,000, 10. Pause, pause, inhale, pause, pause, exhale. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5, 1,000, 6, 1,000, 7, 1,000, 8, 1,000, 9, 1,000, 10. Pause, pause. I want you to keep on breathing in that pattern. Go ahead and close your eyes. I want you to imagine yourself floating on the surface of the water. You can't feel any gravity. You're neutrally buoyant. You feel the coolness of the water on your face. You can hear the wind blowing above you. You can taste the salt in your lips. Keep on breathing. Breathe in. Pause, pause. Exhale. Starting at your toes, I want you to relax every muscle in your toes. From there, you're going to relax all the muscles in your feet. I want you to consciously relax the muscles. If you feel tension, it's okay to tighten it up, but then let it relax. Relax your ankles. Your toes, your feet, and your ankles are nice and relaxed. Relax your calves. Relax your knees. Keep breathing. Your toes, your feet, your ankles, your calves, your knees. are nice and relaxed. Relax your thighs. Relax your hips. Relax your diaphragm, your stomach, your lower back, your toes, your feet, your legs, your lower back, your stomach are nice and relaxed. Relax your chest. Relax your upper back. Relax your shoulders. Your toes to your shoulders are nice and relaxed. Keep on breathing. Breathe in. Pause, pause. Exhale. Relax your toes. Relax your fingers. Your hands. Relax your forearms. Relax your upper arms. Relax your neck. Relax your jaw. Relax the tongue in your mouth. Relax your scalp. From your toes to your scalp, you're nice and relaxed. Take a few minutes, just keep on breathing. Imagine yourself floating on the water. You can feel your body moving with the water. You're so relaxed, a ripple moves down your body and your body moves with that ripple. And when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes and start breathing normally. Alex?
Now, as I said, I wouldn't ask you to be here if there was some practical benefit. And so I'm going to do something a little different. Normally, a speaker will give the take-home message at the end of a presentation. I'm going to do that right now, and I try to think of ways to do it, and I did, and I came up with a quote. Boy, I wish the quote was mine, but it happens to be that young lady right there. Last year in a seminar with Catherine Castle, she really got to the essence of what I was trying to talk about at that time, and it's relevant here. And it's simply, you have to grab their heart by the throat in order to get to their wallet, because that's what we're going to be doing. We want to engage people through affect, through their emotions, in order to eventually benefit financially. But also, as you'll see, this coincides with creating an environmental advocate, because that is also a secondary benefit of reframing your teaching in the way that I'm going to propose. So we'll look at that, some structure and how you could restructure training. We'll talk a lot about the nature of affective learning and why it's so important, as I implied right there. How to enhance in the process pro-conservation attitudes in your teaching. Cultivate more meaningful relationships with your students, which benefits everybody. And then lastly, it would be kind of sad to do this without giving you some practical advice on how to go do this in your programs. And I'll do that as well. However, let me start with one of my soapbox issues. We have been in the doldrums in this industry for decades. We really have. For example, there are half the number of dive shops there are today than there were in 1992. So we've managed to flatline and grow a little bit and decline. And I believe it's for two reasons, what I call confidence and connectedness. I'm not going to deal with the confidence issue. That's a whole different topic. But I do want to talk about this idea of connection. What do I mean by it? I think the fundamental problem is that too many divers have no appreciation, understanding, or connection to the environments they seek to explore. Why do people learn to dive? Not because they want to buy gear. They want to explore the environment. And so they get into a training system that emphasizes almost exclusively knowledge and skill development. Well, what about the whole reason they got into diving? And that is a pretty severe issue, because what that means, if we turn students out who have no connection to the environment, all they've got to look forward to are the pretty fish or having all these scary experiences. And that doesn't last long. As soon as that novelty wears off, bingo, they're off kayaking or snow skiing or whatever. That's a huge constraint we have. And I contend the reframing training in the way that I'll describe is going to change that. I know it does because I've seen it. Now, up until literally 6 months ago, this was kind of conjecture. But I had the opportunity to work with the Business of Diving Institute, with In-Depth Magazine, and unfortunately the late Mike Menduno, and also Dan Europe in constructing a survey on sustainable tourism. And one of the key questions that came up, or one of the key questions that was asked, is how important is understanding of the aquatic environments and ecology of the locations that divers frequent. I don't think you're going to be surprised by this. Almost 87% of professionals felt it was important, and almost 80% of the divers felt it was important. Duh. However, when they were asked, only 16% reported that their training had prepared them well in that regard. So there's one of the disconnects. Second issue, the divers were a little bit more, but notice the professionals felt that they were even less prepared than the divers themselves. And then the one that really, I think, gets to be important is this disconnect. Admitting the importance, but seeing it doesn't come through, because only about 19% of divers said their instructor in their initial open entry-level training course was interested or very interested. What the hell is going on there? I don't think it's an overt attempt. I think it's a lack of training. These issues I've dealt with in my column over the past year, and I'm just going to reference where you can find out more. If you go by booth 935, you can pick up the respective issue. In this case, an article called The Great Disconnect. Okay. Another comment I often make is even the best instructors often only do 2/3 of their job. Now, what in the heck do I mean by that? Well, I contend that our job should include keeping people safe, making sure they have fun, and, as I indicated, connecting them to the environment. We do a good job here if you look at accident statistics. We certainly do a good job there, or we don't have customers, but boy, we don't necessarily do a good job here. Well, when you take a look at the professional development process, it really shouldn't be a question. So what we want to do, we want to turn occasional divers into core divers. In other words, people who dive less than 8 times a year, according to demographers, to people who dive more than 8 times a year. I'll talk more about this actually in a seminar at 1 o'clock. So, what is it about this connection? What are we trying to express? Cultural geographers and social scientists for a long time have been using the term sense of place. And the tourism community, tourism researchers have picked up on this. What is sense of place? The emotional bonds and attachment people form or experiences in specific locations and environments also describes the uniqueness of distinct character of certain locales and regions. I think we all know that. You've been in the underwater at times where you just get it. You feel like you are part of this system. But the point I want to make about mindfulness is, in my view, this is kind of an external experience, but we also need an internal connectedness. And I think that's the real benefit of really engaging in these mindful activities, to get to a true sense of place. And as I said before, I think we are to blame because we still have essentially a professional development model that developed in the early days of Scuba in the 1950s. We need to place as much emphasis on environmental education as we do on skill development, physics, physiology, etc. You need the knowledge base to do the job. Further research has indicated, you may be aware of the Florida Keys, there's a program called Iconic Reefs, and the implementation manager, Maddie Cholnicki, published this in her master's thesis last year. And these are just motivation, satisfaction, and retention factors that she found that really were important in instructors who stayed in the profession. And there shouldn't be any surprises here. Interest in conservation, motivation to participate, place attachment, sense of place, and just the sense of ocean stewardship. So this is what keeps us in the industry, and yet we often don't have the necessary tools to make that a reality. So I'm going to give you a quick lesson in learning. If you ask someone on the street, and probably many of you here, unless you're teachers, tell me what is learning, I'd be willing to bet anything in the world you would describe what we call the bucket theory. Pretty simple. The teacher pours the knowledge into the bucket of the student's mind. That doesn't work, as all of us know. So what is learning? Learning proceeds from the completely opposite direction. Learning is a bottom-up process. Your job as educators, is to nurture the roots and then connect what you want them to learn with experiences that they have already. What this has given rise to, are there any public K-12 teachers in the room? I'll bet you heard this little piece of advice when you were trained. A good teacher is a guide at the side, not a sage on stage. What it's trying to describe, quite simply, is knowledge isn't given, knowledge is constructed. In fact, it's based on psychological theory of constructivism. So we have to somehow attach the experience, the knowledge students have with what we want to teach them. Not pour it into the head, but help to evoke that from within. So what we're really talking about is understanding that learning comes in different flavors, domains formally. And those domains, commonsensically, are the cognitive domain, what we know, the motor skill domain, which what we can do, and then the affective domain in terms of what you believe and how you want to act. Here's the problem. We don't spend, let me jump back. The other thing I wanted to emphasize is you can look at this, or I look at this very differently, or at least more simplistically. This is the realm of the head, the hand, and the realm of the heart. And the reason I emphasize the affective so much is and when I say we, I don't just mean scuba instructors, I mean educators in general ignore this. They assume, well, this will happen automatically. There are ways we can construct what we do to teach these attitudes. And mindfulness is one of those. So what is our job really? If you look at this Venn diagram in the context of what I just described, we're looking for holistic development, engaging all domains. So if you see the junction of that Venn diagram, that's where an effective teacher lands, or at least what they target. So the affective realm is just as important, and in terms of attitudes and actions, even more important than the head and the hand. Again, I'd love to get into more detail, but I also did an article this past year called Training the Complete Diver, Attitude is Everything. So, keep this in mind. Attitudes beget choice, which beget action. And action is one of the things we want them to do, as we'll see in the context of the environment. So what we're doing in the process in creating this complete diver, as I describe it, is a core diver, someone committed to this sport. When I learned to dive back in the 1960s, being a diver was a statement of who you were. It wasn't some pastime that you did once a year on vacation. That doesn't describe most divers. Only about a third of the 2.4 million scuba divers in America are categorized in that core area. So that's less than 700,000 people. We want to expand that slice of the pie. In that article, I talk about the instructor as curriculum. And one of the downsides, as we've abbreviated training over the years, is we've taken the instructor out of the picture, and that instructor is fundamentally important to affective learning. Yeah, it's not necessary to tell war stories, et cetera, but there are reasons you need to be involved in that process in terms of your role modeling, the impressions you're making with students, and basically to show them as examples what you expect. Is there any research to support this? Not much, but I came upon a real interesting study out of the European Journal of Psychotraumatology. What they did in this study is they worked with French military veterans with PTSD, and they also worked with a civilian population that survived the coordinated Islamist attack in Paris. And they used a specific mindfulness technique called BATHMED, and they found, not overwhelming, but they found a significant difference in the ability to deal with PTSD using these mindful methods. And I think more of these kinds of studies are going to be forthcoming. Is anyone doing it? Another internet search. I only really found one organization that specifically identified mindful diving, an Australian group. By the way, all of the links are active. These are hyperlinks. So when you get a copy of the presentation, you can link to all of the resource materials. But as I said, we've been doing this in some sectors of the diving industry now for 30 years through free diving. It's a shame that we haven't, the recreational community has adopted a lot from the technical community in terms of technology, techniques, et cetera, but we really haven't taken advantage of what they're doing in the free diving community. So what I've described, what I've done here in terms of skill development, this is a pretty simple way of structuring buoyancy training. And as we go through it, I'm going to key the instructor cues. Before we descend, take 3 slow breaths. Notice the sound of your bubbles. With each exhale, release surface thoughts so that you can fully be present. So we're trying to get them to focus not only on what they're doing, but how they're emotionally interacting with the experience of being underwater. The next step, descent. Notice how your body feels as you leave the surface. Pay attention to the water pressure, your buoyancy shifting, the light changes. So these are factors that I'm sure new students are oblivious to unless we bring their attention to this. We're trying to connect them more thoroughly with the environment. And then let your breathing guide your hover as you watch an object. Notice how it appears in the water and how your movement affects the water around you. When this is done in open water, of course, and you have the luxury of critters around you, it becomes, of course, more effective. And then finally, the last prompt is really questioning. We don't do enough reflection in our training. And so we should be not only imparting information, we should be soliciting things to key the thinking in our students to consider these issues. So for example, what did you notice about your breathing? What helped you keep calm? How did watching marine life change your awareness? And so these are just simple little tweaks. We're not saying go out and fundamentally restructure what you're doing. We're saying look for key points in the training process where these techniques can be incorporated. And at least with respect to buoyancy control, which is really learning how to control breathing, that's a perfect opportunity. What about the classroom? If you haven't, and this is an active link, a hyperlink, Brian wrote a really insightful article over 10 years ago called How E-Learning is Failing the Industry. And he gets into a concept that's become more and more mainstream in education. We call it the flipped classroom. And I just want to take a minute to see how that might work. Again, the third article I did called Beyond Blowing Bubbles, I actually get into this in more detail. It's part of what we also call hybrid learning. In other words, we do some of the work in the classroom, some of the work online. Now, another aspect that's important to understand about learning is that it varies in its complexity. This pyramid was developed in the 1950s, updated more recently, but you kind of see as you progress from the remember to the creation state, things get more complicated, more complex. And in fact, the verbs you see describe what level of complexity in what's known as Bloom's taxonomy. If you need to write educational objectives, these are the verbs you use to get to that level of the taxonomy. So understanding that learning varies in complexity, let's take a look at how learning is approached. In the classroom, notice they're under your influence at a time where they're acquiring the least complex information. So that seems like a waste of resource. They can read. And when they really need the insights and guidance from an educator, they're not in the classroom. So the flipped classroom is simply just that. We're going to turn it on its head, and we're going to do the complex stuff when they're under our influence. And we're going to let the easy stuff be taken care of outside the classroom. You know, the online reading, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the basic concept of the flipped classroom. So, a couple things. I hope that you'll take this to bear and make it integrated into your course, not just an extra. Because in the process, one of the outcomes, one of the affective outcomes, in addition to appreciating the environment, which got them into diving in the first place, they're also going to become ocean advocates. They can't not become ocean advocates if they understand truly the conditions of things. There's a phenomenon in conservation we call the shifting baseline. And I spent the last 10 years of my teaching career in the Keys, and I had an occasion to be on dive boats lots of times. And we would come in from a dive. I would be sitting in the corner, usually, close to tears, and yet most of the boat was talking about what a wonderful dive it was, because the water was clear and there were lots of fish. And we have relatively good fish populations in Florida. But my baseline is August 1966 on Molasses Reef, on Sombrero Reef. That is my life-defining experience. That's why I'm in the industry. That's why I became a marine biologist. So that shifting baseline, if we can kind of bring that to bear that, boy, things aren't like they used to be. They may not get back to what it was in the 1960s, but they could be a whole lot better than they are today. And that becomes one of the affective outcomes if you're teaching in a more mindful way. Any questions or comments, first of all? Is anyone doing anything in their training programs that relates to this at all? Yes, sir.
Yes. I actually have a high school program. It's part of the kids' curriculum. They can take it for a grade. And because I have the benefit of a full scholastic year to teach a level, we do a lot of other stuff, including conservation and interest and a lot of medical programs. Trying to get them engaged, not just educated.
Good. That's a luxury that, we often don't have in the typical scenario, but we could be doing a better job, particularly through techniques like flipping the classroom and changing the way we interact with students and making them understand that, diving is nothing more than a means to an end. Yeah, you got to be able to breathe, but you're going down there for a reason, and I think they're owed some understanding of what it is they're seeing. And they're also, should get more from the experience than just the external, beauty and appreciation. They ought to understand that this is a way to build a healthier lifestyle and a really unique and engaging experience. I think it's estimated there are only about 19 million certified divers in the world. The population is 8 billion people. So it's a pretty special experience. And it ought to be more than just teaching people how to blow bubbles. And likewise, when, I hope, not if, you incorporate some of this information and it's successful or not successful, I would very much appreciate learning that, because as this grows, which I hope it does, I'd like to help others be more effective in teaching more mindfully. As we have some time,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, another question.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I grew up in Florida, but I live in North Carolina. And we don't have we don't have the luxury of showing them seafoods and things on there very often, right? We're in Florida a lot. And you've given me pause, because my goal is to certify lifetime divers, right? And I'm just wondering how wasteful it is to certify these folks in quarters, and if you have any comments on that.
I grew up in the Mid-Atlantic, and quarries were so much a part of my life. We used to call ourselves underwater geologists, because all we had to see was rocks. That's changing a bit, but I think you can still do, engaging things no matter what the aquatic environment is. I mean, even in some of the quarries we dove, there were living creatures. One had jellyfish, crayfish. So there, you need to ask the question: is it truly not a living system? And but you're right; it involves creativity, and there are people. I think overwhelmingly what people are looking for in diving is visiting a coral reef, but not everybody. I have friends who, they like diving coral reefs, but they'd rather be off the New Jersey coast on a wreck or in a kelp forest off of Southern California. That's nothing wrong with that. And the other thing too, in a quarry, you may not be able to inspire them with the external environment, but I think by incorporating awareness and just what this underwater experience can mean in improving their sense of well-being, relaxation, etc., is also beneficial. So that might be a direction you could turn when there's nothing but a rock to look at. Appreciate the experience of being.
And I might be a little bit biased given where I'm from or what I do, but I do, even if you have zero desire to ever go freediving, I do encourage you to take a freediving course, because we do incorporate, and even in the base level courses, we incorporate pretty advanced physiology, and we talk about what they're going to feel before they ever get into the pool, because freediving is about mindset over your body. You are literally fighting your instinctive urges to take a breath, right? And so we talk about what they're going to feel, and we do it in great detail in the classroom before we get into the water. The other thing that we do is, because, like he was saying, in freediving, we do have a tendency of creating a type of person that it's like they identify as a freediver. They're not a person that freedives. They identify, I am a freediver. I do other things with my life, but I am a freediver. The people will literally change how they eat so that they can freedive better. And all of that is incorporated in the courses. And we talk about how you get to see fish. Fish don't swim away from you when you freedive versus scuba diving, because you're not blowing bubbles. So we talk about that connectivity, and we talk about, like I kind of touched on it just in a little bit, but like you talk about the feeling of the warm or cool water, depending on where you're at, on your face. We talk about the compression on your chest as you descend. Incorporating that, you're giving that visualization to the student so that before they ever actually get into the water, in their mind, they've already been there. So when they actually get to experience it, it's like, oh yeah, this is actually way cooler than I was expecting it to be. And that doesn't matter if you're in a quarry, because I've taught freediving courses in quarries. I've taught them in Arkansas and all sorts of places where it's like, you would not expect freediving here, but we're here doing it. And they come back, and I get letters decades later saying we're still doing it in this exact same spot, and we're loving it, and we're getting maximum depth, and we're doing all of these things, and it becomes a lifestyle. And I am for sure it's because of we get into the tiny nuts and bolts even in the beginning courses.
That's a good insight, you know, because, you know, someone described it to me that a core diver describes himself as I am a diver. An occasional diver describes I go diving. And that fundamental difference could have enormous consequences to our industry in terms of retaining people. And you're right, I agree. I mean, freedivers, frankly, they're pretty psycho. What they do, they love.
We're a little cultish. It's okay.
Just that
I
whole
get
bad
it.
side. And in fact, the conclusion of the article I wrote 25 plus years ago was completely opposite to what I thought. My advice to the reader was go take a freediving class. I mean, that should be the next priority, not a specialty class or advanced. Go take a freediving class. Because as Chris mentioned, the more in-depth discussion of physiology, way more than you would get in a water course, and this mind-body connection through breathing was, you know, really shifted my attitude as an experienced diver. So yeah, I could not agree more with that. If you've not taken a course, it would be very worthwhile. Anything else you want to do as far as an exercise or whatnot?
No, I'm good.
Thanks for coming. I'm going to be around for the whole show. I'm running around, so a text or email would be the best way. But once you've had a bit of time to digest this and maybe go through the presentation again, I'm all ears and would love to hear feedback, suggestions, etc. So again, thanks. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Okay?